and to the analysis of Marcus and Gerson. Washington Post columnists Ruth Marcus and Michael Gerson, Mark Shields and David Brooks are both away tonight. Michael, the Republican president nomination race, Rick Perry came into it this week. How would you characterize his entrance?
I think he had a good week. He is a tremendous retail politician, which matters in Iowa. He went into Michelle Bachmann's hometown in a joint appearance and essentially cleaned her clock. I think that's the right term for it. He also proved that he can make errors, gaffes, and he showed that he doesn't really know how to back off of an error or a gaffe.
You're talking specifically of?
About the Federal Reserve Chairman, the intemperate language about the Federal Reserve Chairman. And, that's a useful political skill to be able to back off of a mistake. He doesn't seem to have it. There are plenty of Republicans right now, however, that are discontented with the whole field. People like Jeb Bush and Mitch Daniels who are encouraging other Republicans to get in. They look at Romney, they look at Perry, and they're not happy. So it's a very fluid field right now.
You agree, Ruth, that the gaffes are there, but the gaffes do not prevent him from having made a terrific entrance in this race?
Well, I would not have called it a good week. I would actually call it a surprisingly rocky week from somebody who's an experienced politician. And as President Obama said, you're in a different league when you start running for president, and every single word that you say is scrutinized. I thought these were just unforced errors. What he said about Bernanke using the word treasonous was really, in my view, crossed the line when he was asked whether President Obama loves his country. He said, you'll have to ask him. He had some questions about evolution versus creationism. He had some issues with global warming. I think all of that is pretty rattling. It might be good for sort of energizing a certain base in the party, but it would, if I were looking towards a general election, I were a Republican consultant or activist, I'd be pretty nervous.
Well, explain, Michael, why those gaffes would not disturb the Republican electorate. For a candidate to use the word treasonous in a context of talking about Ben Bernanke.
I think the unfortunate context here is that that's the importation of language that's used on the internet, used on talk radio, used in book titles. We have, titles like treason. We have, so I think that type of language has been imported in the Republican primary process. I agree that it's a long-term problem. I don't think that it's necessarily a short-term political problem in Iowa and other places. I do think that most Republicans view Perry as having a much longer future in this race than Michelle Bachmann, having more skills, more ties to business, ability to raise money. And these are mistakes that I think do hurt him in the general election, but don't necessarily hurt him in this early primary process.
Rich Lowry, editor of National Review, was on his program last Friday. He said it's what remains to be seen, and we're looking at it a week later, whether or not Rick Perry goes the route of Donald Trump, that he has all this big hoopla and does well in the polls, and then he says a few things, and then boom, he's gone.
Or Fred Thompson from 4 years ago.
Yeah.
I think it remains to be seen. He clearly is, and this is the sort of upside of the week, a very good retail politician, really knows how to get in there and work the crowd. That's important, especially in those early states. Whether he can learn from these mistakes and be more careful, I hate to say it, guarded, because we don't like guarded politicians, and a little bit more controlled in the future. One of the things that's been remarkable, actually, watching Michelle Bachmann, who has been known to say in the past somewhat disturbing things, is how disciplined she has been. And she has not gotten herself into trouble in this latest round. He needs to take a little bit of page out of that Bachmann new playbook.
You think he can do that?
Well, he's a politician that's never lost election in 27 years of politics. He's a skilled guy. And I do think Bachmann hurt herself a little bit with a reputation for being a prima donna in Iowa that doesn't play very well if you look at some of the coverage, the local coverage. But I do think more broadly, Republicans still feel like this race is open. They don't feel like this is a complete field. Now, that may be what we end up with, but a lot of Republicans are not happy where we are right now.
And is that really centered on Mitt Romney, the kind of presumed front runner?
Yeah, I think a lack of enthusiasm with Romney and a lack of comfort with Perry. I think that that's the dynamic you're seeing now. And so you have people that are pushing for Paul Ryan or Chris Christie or, even Giuliani is talking, which I don't think is likely, but there are other people that might be in this field. So that's the dynamic here. I don't think people are all that happy.
Why? There's been a lot of complaints from Ron Paul and his folks that he came in within 200 votes of Bachmann in the straw poll, and he was just brushed aside. Is he not considered a serious contender for the Republican nomination?
Well, I think he's not a serious contender for the Republican nomination. He has a floor of very committed supporters and a ceiling that's not too much higher than the floor, because he has very radical views, which came out in the debates. He seemed very much excusing of Iranian behavior. He's a libertarian on even the hardest legalization of the hardest drugs. He has views that are definitely not mainstream views, in my view, and in the view of most Republicans. So I do think that he is a force, but I think that he has a very committed core that's not likely to expand beyond that group.
How do you see the total group right now, the total race?
I think that Michael put it very well, that it's kind of dissatisfaction with Romney and unease about Rick Perry, and then sort of a question about how much of a race Bachmann can make it with Perry and the degree to which that inures to Governor Romney's benefit or not. Because I think Rick Perry, it's like you might want to just let them play and fight it out, and you could stay Governor Romney sort of playing possum beneath the surface. And that might work well, or else one of them, probably Rick Perry, could really take off, and you would find this sort of wildfire, to mix all my metaphors, really out of control. Sorry about that.
Smoke him out.
Smoke you out.
All right, okay.
All right, enough.
Okay, now let's move to President Obama. He was in Iowa on a bus tour, not political, they said, but he went through the heartland of America, and not just Iowa, he went to 2 other states as well in the Midwest. What do you make of that bus trip?
Well, I think people will remember the vineyard vacation more than the Heartland tour. I mean, in this case, I think the president's policy on his tour was pretty weak. Some of it minor, some of it unlikely to pass when it comes to jobs. And in fact, the White House essentially admitted that this week by saying, oh, we're going to have new policy in September, which is an admission that the old policy wasn't really cutting it. So I think the president's problem here is not just the vacation, which is easy to focus on, but it's the fact that he's coming up with a big jobs plan 28 months after unemployment went over the 9% figure, which most people see as quite late. He's playing catch up on the most important issue in American politics.
Ruth?
I wish I could say I disagree. I thought the tour was very odd, because it was, I'm on a tour, I'm going to come up with a policy, wait until September. And that was problem 1 with it. Problem 2, I thought, was when he started to sort of ramp up this argument against Congress. Well, I need your help to get this Congress to get off its and get something done. Well, when President Truman ran against the Do-Nothing Congress, he had not promised the voters earlier that he was going to be able to make the Congress do something, and that he was the guy who was going to be able to come to town and change all of this. So for the president now to be ramping up against the Do-Nothing Congress, I feel his frustration, but he did tell us he was the one who was going to be able to fix this broken political system that still turns out to be broken.
How do you, in the discussion that Ray ran a moment ago, it was mentioned, the president went off to Martha's Vineyard. I mean, it's now kind of a line that is used to disparage the president. How do you feel about that?
Well, in my human hat, the guy needs a vacation. All presidents deserve a little bit of time off. They never really are off. They're always getting briefed. You saw the pictures with John Brennan, the counterterrorism advisor. Give him a break.
It was released by the White House
Yes.
today. Yes.
Isn't that funny? I don't
funny,
think we're going to see him windsurfing. In my pundit hat, of course he shouldn't be doing this. No political advisor is going to tell him to go on vacation with the economy in this shape. And particularly if they were going to pick some place for him to go on vacation, I do not think Martha's Vineyard would be the top choice. No. But there you have it.
It should be the Jersey Shore, I think. That would be the more
down the shore, as we say in Jersey.
Well, you worked for George W. Bush, Michael. I mean, what is the? How do you fit this whole thing? It always comes up, no matter who the president is. Whenever he he goes on vacation, they take a hit. Why?
Well, I think it's an easy political hit, and I completely agree. I've seen presidents close up. They need vacation, and they don't really get a vacation. It doesn't matter because they're constantly dealing with security briefings and other things, so it's an illusion anyway. So I don't begrudge the president that. But, I mean, the political advice here is just bad. It's a beautiful place. It's a wonderful place. But it's a playground for the rich and famous on vacation. And we have an economic crisis, as the president acknowledged during his own tour. And I think the symbolism here, no political advisor would want this to be the symbolism.
Of course, the Congress is on vacation as well. So could you read this if you wanted to read, if you were a pundit, say, and wrote columns in newspapers? Would you say that, we have this big financial and economic crisis, and yet the government is all on vacation?
That's not a vacation. That's a district work period.
Oh, I see.
Look, the worst thing that could possibly happen to the economy would be for Congress to come racing back to do what? Bicker some more? Disagree about policy? I think the best thing that can happen from the country's point of view is to have Congress go back to their districts, actually hear from people, hear what people are asking for from them. We're seeing some interesting reports about some people giving members of Congress an earful about, hey, maybe we need to think about raising some taxes. It's anecdotal, but members of Congress should hear from their voters. Being here and getting nothing done would have been a very bad idea.
You agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I think it was probably not a good strategy to bring the Congress in, create a sense of urgency and national emergency when you don't know what the outcome's going to be. I think that would have been a bad political approach. But the president has to take seriously. There was a poll number this week that said 71% of Americans disapprove of his handling of the economy.
71%.
That's a dismal figure. It's a serious threat to his reelection. He needs to take that quite seriously. I think they're saying we will when it comes to September. They're not giving too many signs right now that they understand the gravity of what's going on.
Michael, Ruth, thank you both very much.